Hey, Danny. It's only five of us here. That's a nice intimate group. Oh, wait, now we're up to 200. Um, Hi, folks. I only have a really short time now because I'm off to something else. Publicizing a book is a ton of work. Not least because at least I try to have a lot of content in what I say, and I try to have something new every time I talk. And it's not that that's hard. There's plenty of history that I would like to talk about more than I get a chance to, so it's a great opportunity, but it does make your mind really, really keep on things. And time changes are not good for me, in case you hadn't noticed. All right, so I'm going to quickly get going here. And I want to say that this is going to be a little bit different today, not only because it's only going to be a half an hour before I run off, but second, because usually I'm pretty clear about what I think is going on. And as I am watching what's happening in the House of Representatives today, I don't know what's going on. That is, I can tell you what people are doing, but that's far less an interesting question than why they are doing it. And I've actually been sitting here in the hotel room for the last couple of hours, pulling threads and trying to see if I could make more sense out of why people are behaving the way they are. And I have some guesses, but I make no promise at all that they're right. They're just some things to think about. And on the news of things to think about, there's some things I want to front load today. And one of them is something that Alexandria Ocasio Cortez said, I don't even know when. I'm sorry, I've totally lost track of time. But recently, over the impeachment hearing into whether there should be an impeachment inquiry into um, President Joe Biden. And what she said is something that I have said to you repeatedly, and it really bears keeping in the front of your mind, and that is, unless somebody is speaking under oath, they do not have to tell the truth. And it has been a hallmark on the side of the Republican Party for a long time now, but really taking off since Donald Trump won the presidency, where they simply make stuff up. They simply invent stuff. And as you know, this frustrates me to absolutely no end, because I get spin. Everybody does spin, and that's useful actually in a lot of ways. But this is lies. And so, people write to me all the time saying, "What about this? I just heard this. What about this?" At this point, if it is a Republican saying it, I think you have to start from assuming it's a lie and then chasing down what truth there may be in it. But I am just no longer jumping to attention. And I really liked that she said the same thing. Pay attention to the people who are speaking under oath, because they're a really different kettle of fish than when they are speaking not under oath. So, for example, Bernie Kerik, who worked with Rudy Giuliani to try and overturn the results of the 2020 election, had plenty of things to say in front of the cameras, but now that he is supposed to be testifying in court, has said he will not do so without being granted immunity. Well, I assume his story is going to change. And similarly, you saw, for example, Rudy Giuliani out in front of the cameras all the time trying to look as if he was holding hearings. But when actually forced to testify in court, he admitted that he had defamed Shay Moss and Ruby Freeman. So again, keep that in mind. The other piece to keep in mind that I thought was great, somebody wrote it the other day, and it might have even been one of you writing on my Facebook page, and it may not have been too. I'm more than a little scattered. But somebody said, if you want to know I know who it was. No, it was in that same hearing. It was now I can't remember who it was, but it was one of the representatives in that same hearing. It was Summer Lee. I believe it was Representative Summer Lee in that same hearing, where she said, you can tell if something is bipartisan or nonpartisan if you switch the parties in it. So if you see something that's being put forward by one party or the other, and then you flip it and see if it would affect the country the same way if the parties were flipped, you can tell a lot about the goals of a piece of legislation. And I thought that was really, really helpful, because she was talking about the government shutdown and how the prospective government shutdown and how that would affect poor people. And said, if you switch the categories here, you will see that it really does affect one group of people much more strongly than it does another, and therefore you cannot think that this is nonpartisan. I just thought that was a really good construction to think about. All right, so let's now then, if those are the two things that it would be great for people to look for as they're looking at the news these days, what on earth is going on in the House of Representatives right now? And so the obvious thing to tell you is this. As you remember, when the Republicans took the House of Representatives after the 2022 elections, the Republicans had an extraordinarily slim majority. Off the top of my head, I don't remember if it was 4 seats or 5, but it was very, very slim. So what that meant was a couple of things, and this actually speaks to one of the reasons I have such a huge problem with gerrymandering, is that if in fact we had not had the gerrymandering in Ohio, Florida, and Alabama, not to mention in the other states, but in those 3 states, and I'm picking those 3 states because courts have found the gerrymanders that were in place in 2022 in those 3 states unconstitutional. So all of them have to be thrown out, although Alabama tried to ignore that, and Ohio still is ignoring it, I believe. Without those gerrymanders, the Democrats would almost certainly still hold the House of Representatives. So why does that matter? I mean, aside from who controls the House, it matters for the Republican Party, because what that means is if you have gerrymanders in place like that, you have incredibly safe districts. And those would be districts like the one that Jim Jordan from Ohio inhabits, and some of the other extremists as well, because once you have a seat that is that safe, so Lauren Boebert, for example, who's from Colorado, is also in a gerrymandered district that was plus, I think it was 17 in favor of the Republicans, and she is so unpopular in that district that even despite that extraordinary leg up, she only won her seat in 2022 by, I think, about 500 votes, which is just a huge fall, but you know, if you're 17 points up, you got a real leg up. So the reason that matters is that once you have those extreme gerrymandered districts, you have people who don't need to do their jobs. They don't need to do anything except fundraise and push the party line, because they're not going to get challenged except perhaps from the right. So they tend to be extremists. Well, so the problem then, if you take that principle and you put it in the House, the problem is a very small group of extremists in that very small majority have managed to really hold the power over the Speaker of the House, Kevin McCarthy, who is a Republican from California. And McCarthy, by the way, none of the Republican caucus is modern. I'm sorry, conference. For some reason, it's the Democratic caucus and the Republican conference, and I have yet to find anybody who can explain to me why that is. But technically, it's called when you get all the Democrats together, it's called a caucus, and when you get all the Republicans together, it's called a conference. Who knows? I would love to know the answer to that, because that's the kind of crap I like. But anyway, so none of that conference is moderate any longer. They have stripped out all the moderates, and they're all extremists. They're extremists on abortion rights. They're extremists on immigration. They're extremists on religion. They're extremists on all of the major touch points in our society. But Kevin McCarthy is also, and a number of the Republicans are also deeply woven into the financial structure of the United States and want to keep the country stable enough that is stable. People like Chip Roy and of where Texas, and Andy Biggs of Arizona, and Gosar of Arizona, and Gaetz of Florida, off the top of my head, are much less concerned about promoting stability. They're more than happy to burn everything down, and that's an interesting question as to why. That's what's kept me up all afternoon. But so the problem is this very small group can basically make McCarthy do what they want it to do. And if you remember, he had to go through 15 votes in order to become Speaker of the House. And in exchange for becoming Speaker of the House, he had to agree to a change that would mean that one person alone could trigger a motion to vacate the chair. That is essentially a vote of no confidence. That is, they could force the House to vote on whether or not McCarthy would stay in office. So it's kind of a holding the whip hand over them, if you will. So what's happened here is that in order to get through the debt ceiling back in May, as I recall, I'm way better at the past than I'm at the present, can I just say? In that argument about the debt ceiling, the the radical right, the extremists, wanted simply to refuse to raise the debt ceiling. And as I wrote at the time, as I will say again, I'm not sure people understand just how catastrophic that would have been, because the US has never defaulted on its debt before, but the US also underpins most of the world's financial systems. So the sheer crisis of that was unthinkable. And in a larger geopolitical framework, ripping the United States out from underpinning all the agreements that it has been part of since World War II would have given a free hand to the autocrats of the world, the Vladimir Putins especially, but also Saudi Arabia and China, places that would love to see the United States and the United States' guarantees ripped away. So that was just simply unthinkable. So what happened was that the president said, "Don't mess around with our debt ceiling. You just got to stop doing this." And I've talked about that so much, I'm not going to go into it more when I've got so little time. But finally, he and McCarthy agreed to raise the debt ceiling in exchange for not technically over the debt ceiling, but you can think of it that way, that when the budget came up, that the Democrats would agree to cuts across the board, and that was basically it, but to a floor level of spending. Well, as soon as that went through, a number of the extremists just went ballistic and said that they'd been betrayed and said that they were going to come after McCarthy. So since then, in the process of trying to get the budget in place, and this is so the debt ceiling is something totally different. It's the United States' ability to borrow. And I've talked about that before. I'm not going to go into it now. It's got to have a lot of time. But the budget is just, we got to pay the bills every year. We got to appropriate money for the upcoming year. And that budget, the year stops, the fiscal year stops on September 30th and starts on October 1st. If there isn't a budget in place because of some rules changes that happened in the 1970s, ones that can be challenged, actually, I think, at this point, and even the person who was responsible for them, the White House counsel is responsible for them, is on record saying he never intended for the budget negotiations to be this sword hanging over Congress and over the government. But because of those changes, if the government can't appropriate a budget, things are supposed to shut down. Not everything, but most of the things that Americans depend on. And I have to just say, for all the things you hear about, which are huge, one of the places this always hits home for me, an academic, is my colleagues on the science side who spend, literally years of their lives preparing experiments. And if they are government funded and they come to fruition during that period, they're not supposed to work on them. They're not allowed to work on them. And I have seen them literally in tears going, I spent 7 years putting this experiment together, and these people are pissing it away. And this is, I'll never get these years back. Anyway, that was an aside. But so since, it's not like it's a surprise the government has to be funded. That's like government 101. But McCarthy has not been able to come up with an agreement with the extremists to fund the government because he had an agreement with Biden. I mean, they had an agreement. And the extremists just said, no, we're not going to do that. And McCarthy didn't have the votes to get a package through without them because he refuses to work with the Democrats, which is a policy that really began on the Republican side during the 1990s. It's known as the Hastert Rule, if you've wondered what that is, but it was really started under Newt Gingrich when he was Speaker of the House. And that was not that, as it had always been in the past, the Speaker is going to bring a measure forward and try and get it through with a majority of votes from both sides or whoever is there. Instead, it said the Speaker would bring stuff forward only if it could get a majority of the Republicans. So that cuts off anything like immigration law, for example, that the Senate passed when John Boehner was Speaker of the House, and he wouldn't bring it up in the House because he knew it would pass if the Democrats were able to vote on it, but not enough Republicans liked it. So what that rule has done is it has had the effect of dramatically moving legislation to the right when the Republicans hold the House of Representatives. So, for example, we have seen in this House of Representatives just a slew of far-right legislation that makes the extremists really happy, but that could never make it past the Democrats and can't make it through either the Senate, which is dominated by Democrats, or the president. So the extremists kept saying to McCarthy, we don't care what you agreed to, because we're not going to agree to it. We're going to make these draconian cuts. So they were asking, for example, for cuts of 30% to the domestic spending. This is that because there were some things excluded, they asked for a cut across the board of 8%, but that wouldn't include veterans benefits and something else, Medicare maybe, and that meant it was 30% on everything else. I mean, the math is all out there, but it doesn't really matter for this discussion. Anyway, so McCarthy couldn't get any of these bills through. He couldn't. I mean, he got one through, and they put through a number of they divided the appropriations into 12 bills, and then they loaded them with what are called poison pills. And poison pills are pieces of legislation that is completely unacceptable, not negotiable, but completely unacceptable to the other side. So, for example, stripping out LGBTQ plus rights, or having strict, very severe anti-abortion things in these bills, which normally the appropriations bills are kept clean. They try never to load them up on both sides, simply because that's not the place for those fights. All right, so what happened, of course, was that there was this fight over shutting down the government. And in the process of that, the extremists just kept saying, nope, 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 we're not going to pass these. Nope, nope, nope. Finally, and it was quite a surprise, McCarthy forced onto the floor a measure that the Democrats took one look at, and it was clean, with two exceptions. It increased disaster funding for the United States, and it cut funding to Ukraine, and that's going to matter. I mean, it's going to matter in a lot of ways. It's going to matter to me in the next 9 minutes. And it passed, but it passed with all but one Democratic vote, and the one that didn't pass was a man in Illinois whose constituency is largely Ukrainian Americans. And a lot of Republicans also voted for it, but not the extremists. And it needed the Democratic votes to pass. So McCarthy did the unthinkable for the extremists. He worked with the Democrats to fund the government. Now, to you and me, that looks like, hello, that's the way it's supposed to work. But to them, this was an extraordinary betrayal. So Matt Gaetz, who is a representative from Florida and an extremist leader, I would not call him a leader otherwise, but he has made himself the leader of the extremists, has taken advantage of the rule that the extremists forced onto McCarthy when he became Speaker to try and vacate the chair. Okay, so that's where we are today, right? Let's be really clear about this. This has nothing to do with the Democrats. The Democrats are very well organized. They are working as a unit, even everywhere from the more extreme progressives through the more conservative Democrats. They are doing what leadership wants, unless, and this is crucial, unless leadership tells them it doesn't care. And that's always something there are times when a leader will say, do whatever works for you and your constituents. So far, that has not happened here, but I kind of wanted to throw that caveat out there. All right. What's happening is the Republicans are freaking melting down. And it's really interesting as a scholar, because this has been coming since, well, people associate it with the Tea Party, but it's really before that. I mean, it's been coming since Newt Gingrich took over the House in the 1990s and tried to throw away everybody who didn't agree with him. Now, he did in fact he and his successors managed to purge the party of traditional Republicans. But now we're so far to the right that a small group of people who are determined to basically to get their own way and shut down the government until they get everything they want on their far right agenda is turning against even the people in their party who share most of their values, but actually see a value in the U.S. government. I mean, it's just absolutely fascinating. So earlier this morning, they did in fact make a motion to have a vote to vacate the chair. And in that, it was what people were watching was, would the Democrats defend McCarthy? And they didn't. As a unit, they said, this is not our problem. And that was a really interesting moment, because McCarthy made no friends among the Democrats when, after the shutdown, when they saved his bacon, he came out on the Sunday talk shows and basically said this was all the Democrats' fault. And of course, it had nothing to do with the Democrats. It is entirely a Republican problem here. So, all that being said, what's going to happen going forward? The Democrats have said they will not save McCarthy. Who knows? Because the vote is happening, I think, in 7 minutes. And it's going to be alphabetical, and I'm going to be in a car, so I'm not going to be able to watch it. So you guys have to watch it. But people are asking what's happening on the Republican side. Now, there's a lot of Republicans who were perfectly willing to moan and gripe about McCarthy not being far enough right for them, but they're sitting in really good committee chairs, like Jim Jordan, for example, like James Comer of Kentucky, Marjorie Taylor Greene, people that he gave positions to try and buy their support. Well, it's worked, because they know they wouldn't continue to have that support if somebody else goes into that speaker's chair. So who's siding with whom on the Republican side right now is just a complete mess. The other side that I'm finding really interesting is, what is Gaetz up to? I mean, what is Matt Gaetz up to? That is, he is up there basically burning the place down. And this is, I think, the question. What is his end game? And one of the things, and I don't know, just to be honest, I do not know. This is what I am puzzling over today. I mean, there's any number of things you could say. He just wants to burn it all down is one thing to say. He just likes the attention. That's another thing that people have said about him, is that he loves having the cameras on him. You know, maybe he's fundraising, but for what? I mean, he is so loathed in the Republican conference now that basically they're going to try and throw him out. They'll keep George Santos, but they're looking to see if they can throw him out with an ethics investigation, which maybe they can. I mean, the ethics issue is out there about the underage girls and all that. But I'm going to go back. This is so weird, and I really could be wrong. Yeah, maybe he's trying to become Florida governor, because DeSantis is certainly falling apart. But I think there's a larger picture here. Of course, I always think there's a larger picture, and maybe there's not. Maybe they're all just weenies. But until there's a speaker in that speaker's chair, the House cannot do any business. And people have asked, does it have to be someone from the House? No, technically it doesn't. There's no rules for whether or not you could have somebody else from outside. And there's a very funny journalist online who has a name that's one letter off from Matt Gaetz, and who just has suffered now ever since Matt Gaetz rose. And he said, listen, enough of them are dumb enough that I could probably become Speaker of the House, which wouldn't be a bad thing, because he's very smart. He's Matt Gertz, not Matt Gaetz, and he's a very good follow on social media. But although technically that's not the case, it has never been done before that somebody has gotten a speaker from outside. So it worries me that, in fact, if they vote to vacate McCarthy from the speakership, now they have to put somebody else in. And it took 15 votes to get McCarthy. So who on earth can get that many votes again? It's entirely possible that McCarthy will run again, but he's going to have a really different deal with the Democrats, because he knows now he can't get the entire Republican conference. He's going to have to move to the Democrats. And if he does that, they're certainly not going to put up with the kind of crap he's been handing them, including this new attempt to really rewrite our immigration laws in order to put money behind Ukraine. I know it's all like a bunch of moving pieces. But if it takes a really long time, and bear with me here, the most important thing on the table right now for the next 45 days, aside from our funding, is funding Ukraine. And it's important to remember that only about 1% of our budget goes to foreign aid at all, and only about 5% of our our defense budget has gone to Ukraine. And part of that funding that funding has been, and this is a terrible thing to say, when you think of the extraordinary destruction in Ukraine and the loss of lives and the war crimes and the torture and everything that Ukrainians are putting up with and fighting back against to reclaim their country. But for people who are saying that the United States should not be giving that money to Ukraine, and it's not money, by the way, it's aid in the form of weaponry and humanitarian aid. If they shouldn't be doing that, literally, there is nothing we have ever done that is more cost effective. That is, for about 5% of our defense budget, what had been our second primary geopolitical foe has been simply hamstrung. I mean, Russia's in terrible shape. And you can follow this in any number of places. I don't have time to tell you where to find it, but take my word for it. Russia, the sanctions and everything that's happening to Russia means Russia is not going to recover in our lifetimes. So if he can stop that by shutting down the US Congress from being able to do any business, that badly hurts Ukraine. And people who support Donald Trump, like Matt Gaetz, hate Ukraine because Ukraine was not under Volodymyr Zelensky, because it was not willing to work with Trump to undermine Biden in 2019. That's what the whole first impeachment was about. I feel like I probably just lost everybody because I know I'm deep in the weeds. But it would certainly hurt Ukraine, and it would certainly help Vladimir Putin. And of course, we are coming up on another election. And in 2016 and 2020, we know that the Russians interfered to try and help Donald Trump. And I absolutely could be wrong. Probably am wrong. But I think it's a mistake in this moment not to be watching the interplay of Ukrainian funding, the fact that Donald Trump is pitching a nutty because of his fraud trial in New York City, where his finances are being shut down, finances that we know have been deeply tied to Russia, and this particular crisis in the House. So I don't have a lot. I really don't have a lot today. What I have mostly is questions, and I don't know how any of this is going to come out. I will say that I'll leave you on this. One of the things I did in trying to figure this out was to dig into what was our most contested speakership of the House, 1856. And it took 133 ballots for people to come up with voting behind Nathaniel Banks of Massachusetts. And that's an actually really interesting case, because Banks was he wasn't really a normal party figure in any number of ways, but he was elected to Congress as a know-nothing. That is, as part of the anti-immigrant party, but it's been pretty well established by historian Tyler Anbinder that what was really attractive for most voters was that the know-nothings were standing against the spread of enslavement, against the slave power. So after 133 ballots, everybody who hates each other over everything decides to put Banks in the speaker's chair, not because they like Banks, but because they hate the extremists so much on the other side. And that seems to me to be, if you're looking for a historical precedent, that's the best I got for you, because there's an awful lot of people in the US Congress right now who disagree about absolutely everything. But what they can all agree on is that they hate Matt Gaetz. So, and the people who like him. And they're not helping the Republicans either on a national level as the face of the party. So we'll see. The vote's about to take place. I got to go hop in a car. Thank you for there's another thing. Somebody mentioned Trump here. I mean, the other thing in the news, of course, is that a judge has just slapped Trump with a gag order because he's gone after a court clerk by name and put a picture on social media. Those are the front runners for the Republican Party. I mean, what we're seeing is the dramatic destruction of a political party, and its only parallel is the period in the 19th century when the Democratic Party similarly self-destructed, and that was actually reborn in really interesting ways, but on a completely different, a really interestingly different basis. So anyway, that's all I got. I'm sorry, I don't have definitive answers, but I don't think anybody does right now. And I wish I could be a fly on the wall to watch this play out. Thank you for being here. I'll see a lot of you on the rest of this tour, and I will be back as soon as I can be. And I'm going to try and write tonight, although I'm booked from now until midnight my time, so that's not good. Anyway, thanks for being here. I'll talk to you later.